We begin my top 36 wide receiver rankings with wide receivers that I think are mid to low end wide receiver threes. We have McMillan, Williams, Mooney, Addison, Worthy, and Ridley. Jalen McMillan has scored 4 touchdowns in the past 3 games. Now, the last time in which he faced Carolina, he didn't have a particularly great game. I do think he's going to have a better game this week. I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I do think he's actively involved as the wide receiver too. Jamison Williams went off for 143 yards and a touchdown this past week. The yards were a career high. I don't think he's going to have the same success here against San Fran, who do allow the fewest points to opposing wide receivers. I still think he's going to be actively involved, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Darnell Moneyman Mooney went 5 for 82 and 0 this past week. It was a welcome sight in Michael Penix's first start. Here against Washington, it's a plus matchup. I do think he's going to see a good amount of targets, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Jordan Addison did end up scoring a touchdown in what was otherwise an underwhelming performance this past week. He's been a little bit streaky in terms of being way on or just fine. Here against Green Bay, they do allow the second fewest points to opposing wide receivers. Now, the last time in which they played Green Bay, he had a fantastic day. Here, I don't think he's going to have a ridiculous day. I think he's going to be involved. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I think Jay Jettis has a much better week. Xavier Worthy has had 11 targets in each of the past 2 weeks and scored a rushing and receiving touchdown as well in this time span. Here against Pittsburgh, they do allow the 9th fewest points to wide receivers. I think he's going to see a heavy amount of targets in this game. I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I think he has a fine day as a fine mid wide receiver 3. Calvin Ridley is coming off a 3 for 78 and 1 performance this past week. Here against Jacksonville, it is a plus matchup. I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I do think he's heavily involved, and I think he's a mid wide receiver 3. And now we have wide receivers that I think are mid wide receiver 3s to low end wide receiver 2s. We have Downs, Hill, Thielen, Samuel, Smith, Pickens, Shakir, and Neighbors. Josh Downs is coming off a 60-plus yard, 1 touchdown performance this past week. So here against the New York Giants, they do allow the 13th fewest points to opposing wide receivers. I think that while they aren't horrible against the pass, I do think that a lot of that is just because of the nature of the game scripts in which the Giants are losing heavily usually. Here against the Giants, I don't think the Colts are going to build an insurmountable lead by any means. I do think they're leading in this game, though, and I think he sees a good amount of targets, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Tyreek Hill has had no more than 36 receiving yards in each of the past 2 games. He did happen to score a touchdown this past week, which helped make it not a terrible day, but the Tyreek Hill of old is starting to fade, it seems like. Here against Cleveland, though, it is a plus matchup. He's always 1 missed tackle away from a long touchdown, but it's really starting to get worrying, and it's really hard to trust him given how poorly he's fared the past 2 weeks. Adam Thielen has had at least 10 full PPR points in each of the past 4 weeks. I think he does so once again for a 5th consecutive week, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Deebo Samuel had a wide receiver 5 finish and came back to life after posting dud after dud after dud. Here against Detroit, while it is a plus matchup and the game script should involve quite a bit of passing, I do think that the passes are going to be heavily split between him, Jennings, and Kittle. So I don't think that Deebo is going to have the massive game in which he had this past week this week, but I still think that it was good to see signs of life, and I still think that he's a solid wide receiver 3. Devontae Smith, in the absence of Jalen Hurts, was able to get 8 targets and 6 receptions. Now, he didn't have a massive day, but in a Kenny Pickett-led offense, that's pretty encouraging. I think here against Dallas that there's a decent, chance that Jalen Hurts makes this game. If he does, perfect. But if he doesn't, I would be a little bit more worried than Devontae Smith. This projection is with Jalen Hurts ending up clearing the concussion protocol. Here against Dallas, I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I do think he sees a healthy amount of targets and is a solid wide receiver 3. It's been a minute since we've seen George Pickens. However, he is playing against Kansas City this week. It's a plus matchup. I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I do think he gets several chunk gains en route to a wide receiver 3 finish. Khalil Shakir, 3 weeks ago, had over 100 receiving yards, and since then he's had no more than 39. He did happen to score a touchdown 2 weeks ago, salvaging his fantasy day. Here against the Jets, though, they do allow the 3rd fewest points to opposing wide receivers. It's a really tough matchup. I think he gets it done from a PPR perspective, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Malik Neighbors has scored less than 10 full PPR fantasy points only 1 time, and he had 8.1 against Philadelphia the last time they played. Here against Indianapolis, they do allow the 12th fewest points to opposing wide receivers. I still think that due to the immense target volume in which he gets, that he's a really safe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type. I don't project him to score a touchdown, but if he does happen to, then he's going to finish much higher in these rankings. It really is sad for him that he has been graced with abysmal quarterback play. The good news, though, they are very likely to get the number 1 overall pick. I don't see them winning a game. And so next year, Malik Neighbors should be way higher up these rankings. If you like what you're hearing and seeing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Make sure you check out my other positional rankings, being running back, tight end, and quarterback rankings as well. Thanks. And now we have wide receivers that I think are low in wide receiver 2s to potentially high in wide receiver 2s. We have Myers, Wilson, Flowers, Jennings, Allen, McConkey, Sutton, London, Lamb, and Adams. Jacoby Myers is coming off his worst fantasy performance of the entire season this past week, including only seeing 5 targets. Here against New Orleans, I do think he's going to fare a little bit better. I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I do think he sees increased volume. Garrett Wilson has been fine, but not spectacular the past couple weeks. Davante Adams has established himself as the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. It's quite disappointing. Garrett Wilson, when he was receiving the volume, was fantastic. I guess Rodgers just likes Adams more. But in regards to Wilson, I think he's going to see a decent amount of volume in this game against the Buffalo Bills. I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I still think that he's a solid low-end wide receiver 2. Zay Flowers had 100 receiving yards this past week. He did sustain a shoulder injury. He was limited in practice, so I think he'll probably be good to go. Here against Houston, it's a plus matchup. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I do think he's a PPR machine and a low-end wide receiver 2. Juwan Jennings has been quite disappointing the past 2 weeks. Here against Detroit, though, it's a plus matchup. I do think he ends up scoring a touchdown en route to a mid-wide receiver 2 finish. Keenan Allen has had 20 or more full PPR points in 4 of the past 5 weeks. I don't think he has that level of success here against Seattle, but it is a plus matchup, and I do think he ends up scoring a touchdown. In his return from injury, Ladd McConkey has scored 14 and 16 full PPR fantasy points. Here against New England, there is a chance he sees some Christian Gonzalez, but he is such a good route runner and just such a good receiver already that I don't think it's going to be an issue for him, and I do think that he's going to be a solid wide receiver 2. Courtland Sutton has come back down to earth with only 12 and 10 full PPR points in the past 2 weeks. Here against Cincinnati, the game script should necessitate quite a bit of passing. I don't think he ends up with a touchdown, but I do think he has a solid day from a yardage perspective. Drake London, in Michael Penix's first start, had over 10 full PPR points. Here against Washington, it's a plus matchup. It should necessitate both teams passing, and I do think he ends up with a touchdown. And now we have CeeDee Lamb. Now, he was held to a little bit north of 8 points last time in which he played against Philadelphia, but he has been on a tear recently. I mean, in 55% of the snaps, he had over 17 full PPR points this past week. Here against Philadelphia, it is a really tough matchup. They allow the 8th fewest points to wide receivers. I don't think he has a fantastic day from a yardage perspective, but I do think he scores a touchdown. And now we have Davante Adams. In each of the past 3 weeks, he's had at least 19 full PPR points. He's a good lock to score a touchdown. I do think he ends up scoring a touchdown en route to a high-end wide receiver 2 finish. And now we have wide receivers that I think are mid to low-end wide receiver 1s, but probably not candidates to be the wide receiver 1 this week. We have T. Higgins, DJ Moore, JSN, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Puka Nacua. T. Higgins has had 19.8 full PPR points in each of the past 2 weeks. Here against Denver, though, they do allow the 7th fewest points to wide receivers. It is a really tough matchup. I think, though, that he ends up posting a touchdown this week en route to a low-end wide receiver 1 finish. In every game since Week 11, DJ Moore has had at least 10 full PPR points. Here against Seattle, it is a matchup that he can exploit. I think he sees the most volume among the wide receivers in Chicago, and I do think he ends up with a touchdown. In the past 7 games, JSN has had at least 74 receiving yards in all of them. He is finally being utilized as a centerpiece of the passing offense. However, he is matched up here against Chicago. They do allow the 6th fewest points to wide receivers. It's a really tough matchup, but I do think he eats as a PPR machine, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown is coming off a 19 full PPR performance. This week, though, he's matched up against San Fran, who allowed the fewest points to opposing wide receivers. I do think he ends up with a touchdown, extending his streak to 3, but I don't think he has one of these ridiculous days from a yardage perspective. In every game that he hasn't punched somebody and been ejected, Puka has seen at least 8 targets, so that's encouraging. However, he is coming off a modest performance of a little bit north of 13 points this past week. Here against Arizona, it's a middle-of-the-road matchup. I think he's as good of a bet as anybody to have at least 10 full PPR points. I do think he ends up with a touchdown en route to a top 10 finish. And now we have wide receivers that I think are mid to elite wide receiver 1s and likely candidates to be the wide receiver 1 this week. We have McLaurin, Evans, Brown, BTJ, Jay Jettis, Chase, and Collins. Terry McLaurin has scored 6 total touchdowns in the past 4 games and had at least 17 points in all of them, including 3 games of 20 plus. Here against Atlanta, they allow the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. It's a fantastic matchup. I think he has another receiving touchdown and over 100 receiving yards. And now we have Mike Evans. So he's alternated between posting a fine or a dominant fantasy performance in each of the past 5 weeks. Here against Carolina, he did struggle with them the last time in which they played. They do allow the 10th fewest points to opposing wide receivers, although they are trying really hard to get him 1,000 receiving yards on the season. So I think they're going to force feed him the ball in an attempt to do so. And so I think he's going to have a fantastic day, and I do think he scores a touchdown. A.J. Brown, in a game in which Jalen Hurts left early with a concussion, had 23 full PPR points, and the majority of it came with Kenny Pickett. And so it appears as though the loss of the starting quarterback didn't really affect him that much. And so in a plus matchup here against Dallas, I think that he's a solid wide receiver 1 and a top 5 option. Brian Thomas Jr. has scored at least 28 full PPR points in each of the past 2 weeks, en route to a wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 3 finish in each week. Here against Tennessee, they did hold him to over 16 full PPR points the last time in which these two teams played, and they do allow the 4th fewest points to opposing wide receivers. I don't think he's going to have any trouble, though. He is seeing a massive target share, and every week post-bye, he has seen at least 10 targets with a maximum of 14. So with that kind of utilization, along with his talent, I think that he is an absolute bet to be a top 5 wide receiver this week, and I do think he scores. Justin Jefferson has scored 30 plus full PPR points in 2 of the past 3 weeks, and he scored at least 1 touchdown in each of the past 3 weeks. Here against Green Bay, they do allow the 2nd fewest points to opposing wide receivers. It doesn't matter. He is absolutely matchup proof. I think he has over 100 receiving yards and a touchdown. Now we have Jamar Chase. So I think he's going to have a fantastic week. Even though he's matched up here against Denver, who allow the 7th fewest points to wide receivers, he's probably going to see quite a bit of Pat Surtain. I don't think it's going to matter. It's Jamar Chase. He is as matchup proof as it gets. I think he's going to have a dominant performance, and I do think he scores. And now we have Nico Collins. All right, so he has faced off here against Baltimore, who allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers. The thing, though, is without Tank Dell and with Deontay Johnson just coming in, I think he is going to see a ludicrous amount of targets this game. I think he's going to have over 100 receiving yards with a touchdown en route to a wide receiver 1 overall finish. And so to conclude, wide receivers that I think are mid to low end wide receiver 3s, we have McMillan, Williams, Mooney, Addison, Worthy, and Ridley. Wide receivers that I think are mid wide receiver 3s to low end wide receiver 2s, we have Downs, Hill, Thielen, Samuel, Smith, Pickens, Shakir, and Neighbors. Wide receivers that I think are low end wide receiver 2s to potentially high end wide receiver 2s, we have Myers, Wilson, Flowers, Jennings, Allen, McConkey, Sutton, London, Lamb, and Adams. Wide receivers that I think are mid to low end wide receiver 1s, but probably aren't candidates to be the wide receiver 1 this week. We have Higgins, Moore, JSN, ASRB, and Puka. And then wide receivers that I think are mid to elite wide receiver 1s and are likely candidates to be the wide receiver 1 this week. We have McLaurin, Evans, Brown, BTJ, Jay Jettis, Chase, and Collins. All right, you know the drill. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Is there somebody that I'm not projecting for enough points? If so, let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, if you like what you've seen and heard, make sure you like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck in your fantasy championships or, any matchup you might have this week. And make sure you check out my other positional rankings being running backs, quarterbacks, and tight ends. Thanks.